The army mocked a black medic for his size. But in the storm-lashed Philippines of 1945, something bigger was about to emerge. Rain hammers against tin roofs. Enemy prisoners whisper in fear. White officers watch with suspicion as a segregated world crumbles. A black sergeant forced to endure daily humiliation. 5 Japanese women prisoners trapped in a collapsing shed. Between them, a moral line no one dared to cross. When thunder cracks and wood splinters, an order stands: leave them to die. But in one act of defiance, a medic chooses humanity over hatred. Doors are broken, rules shattered, lives saved. Now facing court-martial in disgrace, a soldier discovers what truly makes a man bigger than others thought possible. When the world demands obedience, what makes someone stand tall against the storm? And how does saving your enemy's life change what you see when you finally look in the mirror? The sun had barely risen over the field processing camp outside Manila. Already, the heat pressed down like a wet blanket. Sergeant Caleb Hightower shifted the weight of the medical supply box in his arms and wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. August in the Philippines felt nothing like August back home in Georgia. Here, the air stuck to your skin. It made your uniform feel like it weighed twice as much. And today promised to be another scorcher. Caleb's boots kicked up dust as he made his way toward the intake area. His orders had come late last night. Assist the military police with processing new prisoners. Japanese soldiers captured in the mountains. Word was that some of them were women. 2 white MPs lounged in folding chairs under a canvas awning. They didn't stand when Caleb approached. "'Bout time," one said, not bothering to look up from his cigarette. "They'll be here any minute." Caleb set down the medical box. "Where do you want me to set up?" The second MP jerked his thumb toward a wooden table. "Over there. Basic checkups only. We ain't running a hospital for the enemy." "Yes, sir," Caleb said. Though neither of the MPs outranked him, best to keep things smooth. 6 months in this man's army had taught him that much. The rumble of trucks broke the morning quiet. 3 canvas-covered vehicles rolled to a stop, dust billowing behind them. The MPs finally stood, adjusting their helmets and straightening their posture. "Showtime," the first one said. The back flaps of the lead truck opened. An MP sergeant helped 5 women climb down. They wore tattered Imperial Japanese Army uniforms, some with nurse insignia still visible through the dirt and wear. Their hands were bound with rope at the wrists. Their faces showed exhaustion, fear. Caleb had treated enemy wounded before, men who tried to kill his fellow soldiers just days earlier. But these women looked different. Younger than he expected, smaller. One limped badly as they formed a line. "Name, rank, and unit," the MP sergeant barked, though it was clear most didn't understand English. The tallest of the women, still a head shorter than Caleb, spoke a few halting words. "I speak little English." The MP nodded. "Good. You translate for the others." She bowed slightly. "Yes, sir." As the MPs began the intake process, Caleb prepared his medical supplies. Bandages, iodine, thermometer. Basic tools for basic care. The women whispered among themselves. Then 2 of them looked directly at Caleb, their eyes widening. They whispered more urgently, and one covered her mouth as they both let out nervous laughs. The MP nearest Caleb snorted. "What's so funny?" he demanded of the translator. She looked embarrassed. "Nothing, sir." "Tell me," he insisted. She hesitated. "They say he is very big, bigger than they thought Americans could be." The MP's face split into a wide grin. He turned to Caleb. "You hear that, Hightower? They're saying you're much bigger than they thought." He laughed loudly, drawing the attention of the other white soldiers. Caleb's face burned, but he kept arranging his supplies, pretending not to hear. "Hey, boys," the MP called out. "The Jap ladies are impressed by Hightower's stature." More laughter rippled through the white soldiers. One made a crude gesture. Caleb kept his eyes down, his hands steady, as they unpacked gauze and sulfanilamide powder. The mockery wasn't new. The audience was. The women seemed to realize something was wrong. The translator looked confused, then embarrassed as she understood the soldiers were twisting her words. "Okay, enough fun," the MP sergeant finally said. "Get them processed and moved to the medical tent for inspection." One by one, the women stepped forward. Name, age, unit. The information was recorded in a logbook. The translator, Caleb, heard her name recorded as Natsumi Tanaka, helped the others through the process. As the last woman was logged, a white lieutenant appeared from the command tent. "Hightower," he called, striding over. Caleb straightened. "Yes, sir." "Change of plans. You're going to inspect these prisoners personally. Check for injuries, disease, make sure they're not hiding anything." "Sir?" Caleb glanced at the MPs, who looked as surprised as he felt. "Problem, Sergeant?" The lieutenant's voice had an edge. "No, sir. No problem." "Good." The lieutenant turned to the MPs. "Take them to the medical tent. Hightower will handle it from there." As the women were led away, Caleb gathered his supplies. The sun climbed higher, beating down on his neck. He could feel the lieutenant watching him. "Don't get too friendly," the officer said. "They're still the enemy." "Yes, sir," Caleb replied, his voice neutral. "Just doing my job." He followed the group toward the medical tent, aware of the white soldier's eyes on his back. Their laughter still echoed in his ears. At the entrance to the tent, Caleb paused. The canvas flapped in the light breeze. Inside, 5 women waited for his care. Outside, white officers waited for him to make a mistake. He took a deep breath and pushed through the flap. The inside of the medical tent was 15 degrees hotter than outside. Sweat immediately beaded on Caleb's forehead as he set his supply box on a small metal desk. The air smelled of antiseptic, canvas, and fear. 5 pairs of eyes followed his movements. The Japanese women sat on folding stools in a row, backs straight, despite their obvious exhaustion. Their wrists had been untied, but each woman kept her hands folded in her lap, as if the ropes were still there. Caleb cleared his throat. "I'm Sergeant Hightower. I'm a medic." He pointed to the Red Cross armband. "I need to check you for injuries." None of the women responded, though the translator, Natsumi, gave a small nod. He decided to start with her. "Can you tell them I'm going to examine each person? Basic medical check. Nothing more." Natsumi spoke softly in Japanese. The women looked at each other, then back at Caleb. One whispered something that made the others tense up. "They are afraid," Natsumi said. Caleb nodded. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of wounded men, of civilians caught in the crossfire. He moved slower, trying to appear less threatening. "I'm just going to check your temperature first," he said, showing the thermometer. When he approached, Natsumi flinched slightly, but allowed him to place the thermometer under her tongue. The other women watched carefully, judging whether he could be trusted. The late afternoon sun slanted through gaps in the canvas, casting stripes of light across the dirt floor. Outside, the camp bustled with activity, engines revving, men shouting, the clatter of equipment being moved. Inside, the silence felt heavy. One by one, Caleb checked each woman. Temperature, pulse, visible injuries. He spoke little, but kept his movements deliberate and gentle. The youngest woman had a nasty cut on her arm that was starting to show signs of infection. Another had a high fever. Natsumi herself limped from what appeared to be a twisted ankle, poorly wrapped in a dirty bandage. As he knelt to examine her ankle, she spoke. "I am sorry." Caleb looked up. "For what?" "For laughing." Before. Her English was simple but clear. "We did not mean to make trouble." Caleb carefully unwrapped the filthy bandage. "It's fine." "No," she insisted quietly. "We were nervous. Afraid. In our country, we hear things about American soldiers." She paused, choosing her words. "Especially colored soldiers. They say you are savage, but you are gentle doctor, medic." Caleb corrected automatically. "Not a doctor." Natsumi nodded. "Medic. Still, You are kind. Caleb didn't know how to respond. He focused on her ankle, which was swollen and bruised. How did this happen? Running from your soldiers. I fell. He nodded and began cleaning the injury. Outside, boots crunched on gravel, approaching the tent. Caleb worked faster. This needs to be properly wrapped and kept clean. He reached for fresh bandages in his kit. The tent flap flew open. The white lieutenant from earlier stepped in, squinting as his eyes adjusted to the dimmer light. "How's it going in here, Hightower?" His tone suggested he wasn't really interested in the answer. "Almost done, sir. Minor injuries mostly. One with signs of infection, another with fever." The lieutenant walked closer, looking at the women with undisguised contempt. "You being thorough?" "Yes, sir." "You sure about that? You seem to be taking your time." The lieutenant watched as Caleb finished wrapping Natsumi's ankle. "Careful there. Seems like you're being mighty gentle with the enemy." The women looked down at the ground. They might not understand all the words, but they understood the tone. "Just doing proper medical procedure, sir," Caleb said, keeping his voice even. The lieutenant studied him for a long moment. "Well, I've got new orders for you, Sergeant. These prisoners need ongoing supervision. We're setting up a small field clinic about a mile from the main camp. You'll be in charge of them there." Caleb tried to hide his surprise. "Sir? Problem, Sergeant?" "No, sir. When does this assignment start?" "Dawn tomorrow. Report to transport at 0500. The clinic's already stocked with basic supplies." The lieutenant smiled thinly. "You'll have plenty of time to get better acquainted with your patients." As the officer turned to leave, he added, "Oh, and Hightower, remember your place. They may be prisoners, but they're still, and you're still." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The tent flap closed behind him. The lanterns flickered as darkness began to fall outside. Caleb put away his supplies, aware of Natsumi watching him. The trap was obvious. Isolation, responsibility, a dozen ways to make a mistake that could cost him his rank, or worse. "You are troubled," Natsumi said quietly. Caleb didn't answer. He just closed his medical kit and prepared to leave as the evening horn sounded across the camp. The segregated barracks sat at the far edge of camp, separated from the white soldiers' quarters by a muddy field often used for vehicle maintenance. The single-story wooden structure housed 24 black soldiers, most of them support personnel like Caleb. Medics, cooks, drivers, and mechanics. By the time Caleb arrived, most were already inside, sitting on their bunks or at the two worn tables that served as dining and recreation space. A battered radio played faint music, frequently interrupted by static and news bulletins about the war's progress. "There he is," said Private Wilson, a skinny cook from Alabama. "Heard you got assigned to a special detail, Hightower." Caleb set his kit under his bunk. News travels fast. "Man, news is all we got in this place," said Corporal Davis, looking up from a wrinkled letter. "That and bugs." The evening meal was already laid out, spam from a can, cold beans, and bread that had seen better days. Caleb wasn't hungry, but he took a plate anyway and sat at the less crowded table. "So what's this about you and some Japanese nurses?" asked Thompson, a driver who'd been in the Philippines longer than most of them. Caleb chewed slowly before answering. "They're POWs. Not all nurses. I'm supposed to oversee their medical care at some outpost clinic starting tomorrow." A low whistle came from across the table. "They're putting you out there alone?" "Looks that way." Davis shook his head. "Damn, Hightower. They're setting you up." "I know. What happened?" Wilson asked. "Must have been something for them to single you out like that." Caleb pushed beans around his plate. "Nothing happened. Two of the women were talking about me, laughing. One of the MPs decided to make it into something else." Understanding crossed their faces. Black men had been beaten, jailed, even killed back home for less. "You gotta be careful out there," Thompson said quietly. "Those white officers been looking for reasons to come down on somebody, especially now the war's almost over." Almost over? Caleb asked. Davis nodded toward the radio. Been saying the Japanese can't hold out much longer. Some new bomb they dropped. Rumors flying that surrender's coming any day now. Which means we might actually get to go home, Wilson added. Unless somebody does something stupid first. The warning hung in the air between them. I'll be careful, Caleb promised. Careful might not be enough, Thompson said. You're a black man alone with enemy women. They'll find something wrong no matter what you do. Caleb didn't argue. He knew Thompson was right. Later, as the lights dimmed for curfew, Caleb lay on his bunk staring at the wooden beams above him. The Philippines' heat made the barracks feel like an oven, even at night. Around him, men snored, whispered, or wrote letters by flashlight. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the lieutenant's face, heard the mocking laughter of the white soldiers, and beneath that, he saw Natsumi's eyes, dark, intelligent, watching him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The camp horn blew for lights out. The last flashlights clicked off. In the darkness, Caleb went over procedures in his head, thinking of every rule he needed to follow, every boundary he couldn't cross. He finally drifted into uneasy sleep as rain began to patter on the tin roof, dreaming of home and things he couldn't change. Morning came too soon. Caleb woke before the dawn horn, gathered his few personal items, and headed to the transport area. The rain had stopped, but puddles dotted the muddy ground. The air felt thick with moisture. A single jeep waited in the gray light, its headlamps cutting two weak beams through the lingering mist. The driver, a young white private Caleb had never seen before, leaned against the hood smoking a cigarette. "You Hightower?" he asked, flicking the cigarette away as Caleb approached. "Yes. Throw your gear in the back. We're picking up the prisoners on the way." Caleb tossed his duffel behind the seat and climbed in. The jeep's engine sputtered, then roared to life. They lurched forward, bouncing over deep ruts in the road. As they drove, the sky lightened to pale blue. Birds called from the dense jungle that pressed in on both sides of the narrow dirt road. The Philippines might have been beautiful, Caleb thought, if he'd seen it in peacetime. The driver didn't speak, which suited Caleb fine. His mind was too full of worries to make small talk. 3 years in the Army, and he'd seen how differently the rules applied depending on your skin color. He remembered his first day in basic training, how the sergeant had separated the black recruits from the white ones. "You boys are serving your country too," he'd said. "But don't forget your place." Their place had been clear enough. Separate barracks, separate mess halls, separate duties. Even when they shipped overseas, the divisions remained. White soldiers got the glory assignments. Black soldiers got the support roles, the dangerous duties no one else wanted, the blame when things went wrong. The jeep took a sharp turn down an even narrower path. Branches scraped against the sides. After another quarter mile, a small clearing appeared. "There it is," the driver said. "Home, sweet home." The clinic was a single-room hut with a tin roof. It might have been a local family's home before the war, abandoned or requisitioned by the Army. A wooden porch sagged along the front. The windows were covered with screens instead of glass. "This is it?" Caleb asked. The driver shrugged. "What were you expecting? A hospital?" Before Caleb could respond, another vehicle approached from the opposite direction. A covered truck escorted by 2 MPs on motorcycles. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, and the MPs dismounted. "Right on time," one said. "Let's get them unloaded." The back of the truck opened. The 5 women climbed out slowly, blinking in the morning light. They looked even more tired than yesterday, their faces drawn from a night in temporary holding. Natsumi spotted Caleb and gave a small bow of recognition. The other women stayed close together, uncertain. "Here's your charges, Hightower," the MP said. He handed over a logbook. "You're to record their condition twice daily. Supplies are inside. We'll check in when we can." "How often will that be?" The MP smiled. "Worried about being alone with them?" "Just wondering about supply deliveries, and if they need evacuation for serious medical issues. Someone will come by every couple of days. As for evacuation, better hope none of them need it." Getting approval for that's above my pay grade. He looked around the clearing. Radio's inside if there's an emergency. The driver was already turning the Jeep around. The MPs climbed back on their motorcycles. Remember, the MP called as they prepared to leave? They're still the enemy. Engines roared. The vehicles disappeared down the path, leaving Caleb alone with 5 Japanese women as the sun broke fully above the trees. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Caleb picked up his duffel and the logbook. "Let's go inside," he said, gesturing toward the clinic door. The women looked at each other, then at Natsumi, who nodded. One by one, they followed Caleb up the creaking wooden steps. The inside of the clinic was surprisingly clean, if sparse. A row of 5 metal cots lined one wall. A desk and chair sat in the corner. Metal cabinets, likely filled with medical supplies, took up most of the other wall. A small wood stove stood cold in the center, more for sterilizing instruments than warmth in this climate. Caleb set down his things and opened the windows to let in fresh air. The women remained standing just inside the door, waiting for instructions. "You can sit," he said, pointing to the cots. "Rest." Natsumi translated, and the women moved quietly to the cots, sitting with their hands folded in their laps. The youngest, she couldn't be more than 17, looked close to tears. Caleb opened the supply cabinets. Bandages, disinfectant, basic medications, a box of field rations, canteens and water purification tablets. He found the radio on a shelf, already tuned to the Army frequency. "First things first," he said, turning to face them. "We need to get everyone cleaned up and properly treated." He pointed to a door at the back. "There's a pump outside for water. We'll need to boil some for cleaning wounds." Natsumi stood. "I will help. Thank you." Caleb handed her a large metal pot from beside the stove. "I'll check everyone again while you get water." As Natsumi went outside, Caleb approached the woman with the infected cut he'd noticed yesterday. She tensed as he knelt beside her. "It's okay," he said softly, pointing to his medic armband. "I'm here to help." He examined her arm carefully. The cut wasn't deep, but the infection was spreading, red streaks reaching toward her elbow. She needed antibiotics and proper cleaning. One by one, he assessed each woman. The one with fever seemed slightly better today, but still weak. Another had blistered feet from long marches. The young girl appeared physically unhurt, but showed signs of shock, vacant eyes, trembling hands. Natsumi returned with the water and set it on the stove. "For boiling," she said. Caleb nodded. "Can you tell me about them?" he asked quietly. "Their names, what they were doing in the war?" Natsumi hesitated, then began pointing to each woman in turn. "Yumi," she said, indicating the one with the infected arm. "She was nurse, like me." She pointed to the older woman with the fever. "Akiko, she was clerk for officers." "The woman with blistered feet." "Haruka, also nurse." Finally, the young girl, Emiko. She was student, volunteer. "How did you all end up together?" Natsumi's face clouded. "Our field hospital was bombed. We ran to mountains. Many died. We survived, but American patrol found us 3 days ago." Caleb lit the stove and set the water to boil. "And you speak English because—" "I studied before war. My father was diplomat. He thought it important." A faint smile crossed her face. The first Caleb had seen. It disappeared quickly. "Where is your father now?" he asked. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "Dead. Tokyo bombing." Caleb nodded, not knowing what to say. Her father might have been killed by his fellow soldiers, by men he treated and saved. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Natsumi looked surprised, as if she hadn't expected sympathy from an American. The water began to bubble. Caleb added instruments to sterilize them: scissors, tweezers, a small scalpel. While they boiled, he arranged clean bandages and medication. Through Natsumi, he explained what he was doing to each woman as he treated them. Yumi's infected cut needed draining and antibiotics. Haruka's blistered feet required careful cleaning and salve. Akiko took aspirin for her fever. For Amiko, the shell-shocked girl, Caleb could do little, beyond making sure she drank water and ate something. As the morning wore on, the women began to relax slightly. They whispered among themselves when Caleb turned away. Once, he heard Natsumi explaining something about him that made Yumi glance at him with less fear. "What did you tell her?" he asked. Natsumi looked embarrassed. "I told her you are not like the monsters in our propaganda papers, that you are professional." From outside came the sound of a vehicle approaching. Caleb tensed, but it was just a white MP checking the perimeter. The soldier peeked through the window, his eyes narrowing when he saw Natsumi standing near Caleb. "Everything under control, Sergeant?" the MP asked. "Yes, sir. Just treating injuries." The MP lingered a moment longer, then disappeared. His footsteps crunched away, and an engine started. The heat intensified as noon approached. The clinic grew quiet, except for the buzzing of insects outside and the occasional cry of a bird from the jungle. Caleb wrote in the logbook, documenting each woman's condition. Natsumi helped the others settle on their cots to rest during the hottest part of the day. An uneasy peace had been established, fragile, tenuous but real. Outside, the war continued. Inside, for a brief moment, they were just people, injured, afraid, far from home, and a medic trying to do his job. By early afternoon, the heat inside the clinic had become unbearable. Sweat ran down Caleb's back as he organized medications on the small desk. The women lay on their cots, some dozing fitfully, others staring at the ceiling. Natsumi sat on the edge of her cot, rewrapping her ankle with the clean bandage Caleb had given her. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, the touch of someone who treated many wounds before her own. "You were trained," Caleb observed. She nodded. 2 years, before they sent me to field hospital. "Did you want to be a nurse?" She considered this, as if no one had ever asked her what she wanted. "My mother was nurse. It was expected." She finished with the bandage and tested her weight on the foot, wincing slightly. "And you? Why medic?" Caleb paused, surprised by the question. "Didn't have much choice. They needed medics. I had some first aid training from working at my uncle's store back home." "Home is where?" "Georgia. Small town called Marigold." "Is it beautiful?" The question caught him off guard. He thought of the red clay roads, the peach orchards, the creek where he used to fish with his grandfather. "Parts of it," he said finally. "Other parts, not so much." Before she could ask more, the door opened. A white soldier, different from the morning patrol, stepped inside. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on Natsumi sitting upright while Caleb stood nearby. "Checking the perimeter," he said. "Everything quiet here?" "Yes, sir," Caleb replied. "No problems." The soldier walked farther in, inspecting the cots, the women, the medical supplies. "Seems cozy," he said, his tone suggesting something improper. "Just doing my job, sir." "Right." The soldier picked up a bottle of iodine, set it down again. "Heard about your special assignment. Some of the boys were wondering how you got so lucky." Caleb said nothing, keeping his face neutral. "Pretty nurses to look after, all by yourself out here." The soldier let the implication hang in the air. "They're POWs, sir. I'm providing medical care as ordered." The soldier smirked. "Sure you are." He walked over to where Natsumi sat. "This one speaks English, right? You two having nice chats?" He leaned closer at her. "What do you think of your colored doctor, sweetheart?" Natsumi looked down. "He is good medic," she said quietly. "I bet he is." The soldier straightened up. "Well, don't get too comfortable. Lieutenant wants updates on your situation." After he left, silence filled the clinic. Caleb moved to the window, watching until the soldier disappeared down the path. "I'm sorry," Natsumi said from behind him. Caleb turned. "For what?" "They think bad things. Because of us. It's not because of you." She studied him. "Because you're soldier?" Caleb nodded slightly. "That's part of it. This is not fair." A bitter laugh escaped before Caleb could stop it. "Not much is." The other women were watching now, sensing the tension. Yumi asked something in Japanese, and Natsumi answered. Whatever she said made the women exchange glances. "What did you tell them?" Caleb asked. That American army treats you differently, like Japan treats Koreans or Chinese. She hesitated. They did not know this about America. Caleb turned back to the window. There's a lot people don't know. Outside, clouds were gathering. Another afternoon shower was coming. Common in this part of the Philippines. The air felt electric with approaching rain. Will you have trouble? Natsumi asked. Because of us? Caleb didn't answer right away. Would he have trouble? Almost certainly. A lieutenant had practically guaranteed it by putting him here. One mistake, one misunderstanding, and he could face serious consequences. But these women needed care, and he was a medic. That had to come first. I'll be fine, he said. Now let's get ready for that rain. We need to make sure the roof doesn't leak on anyone. Together they checked the tin roof for holes, placing empty containers under the few spots where water might drip through. The first fat raindrops began hitting the metal with hollow pings just as they finished. As Caleb moved to close the windows, Natsumi accidentally brushed against his hand. She pulled back immediately, but not before one of the white soldiers passing by on patrol glanced in. The soldier stared for a moment, then continued walking, muttering something about improper conduct. Caleb's stomach tightened. Another mark against him, another reason for them to watch him more closely. Natsumi had seen it too. I'm sorry, she whispered. Stop apologizing, Caleb said, more sharply than he intended. None of this is your fault. The rain came harder now, drumming on the roof. Thunder rolled in the distance. The clinic grew dark enough that Caleb lit a lantern. We should distribute rations before it gets worse, he said. I'll go get them from the storage box outside. He stepped onto the porch, pulling his jacket over his head against the downpour. The supply box was locked to the railing, protected from the rain by the porch roof. As he unlocked it, he heard voices from the path, white soldiers passing by, their words nearly lost in the storm. Hightower thinks he's special. Getting friendly with the enemy needs to be taught. Caleb's hands tightened on the crate of rations. The threat wasn't even veiled anymore. It was just a matter of time. Thunder cracked overhead as he lifted the crate and turned back toward the clinic door. Rain soaking through his uniform despite the jacket. Inside, 5 women waited for his care. Outside, an unknown number waited for him to fail. He took a deep breath and stepped back inside, the door closing behind him on a world growing darker by the minute. Rain drummed against the tin roof. Inside the clinic, Caleb distributed field rations. Small tins of meat, hard crackers, and powdered drink mix. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Natsumi helped explain to the others how to prepare the unfamiliar food. The young girl, Emiko, still wouldn't eat. She sat on her cot, knees drawn up to her chin, eyes fixed on nothing. She must eat something, Caleb said, glancing at the girl with concern. Natsumi nodded and took a portion over to Emiko's cot. She spoke softly in Japanese, her voice gentle but firm. After several minutes, Emiko finally took a small bite of cracker. What happened to her? Caleb asked quietly when Natsumi returned. Her brother was killed. She saw it happen. Natsumi's eyes darkened with memory. Many terrible things in war. Caleb couldn't argue with that. He'd seen enough himself. Men with limbs blown off, burns covering their bodies, eyes empty from seeing too much death. The rain continued as they ate in silence. Occasional flashes of lightning brightened the dim clinic, followed by rolls of thunder that made the walls shake. Will it rain all day? Yumi asked in halting English, the first time she'd spoken directly to Caleb. Probably just an afternoon storm, he replied, common this time of year. Natsumi translated for the others, who nodded in understanding. A small moment of normal conversation amid everything else. As Caleb gathered the empty ration tins, Natsumi sat on the edge of the desk. She seemed to be working up the courage to ask something. Is it true, she finally said, that colored soldiers eat different food than white soldiers? Caleb paused. Who told you that? The soldier, before. He said many things while you were outside. Of course he did. Caleb set the tins aside, considering how much to say. How much was safe to say? We eat the same rations, he said carefully. But yes, we eat in different places, separate mess halls. Why? Such a simple question, such a complicated answer. That's just how it is. But you fight same war, against same enemy. Caleb moved to the window, watching rain streak down the glass. It's been that way a long time, back home too. Separate schools, separate stores, separate parts of town. This is allowed? It's the law in many places. Natsumi frowned. Japanese propaganda said America talks of freedom but does not give freedom. I thought this was just propaganda. Caleb almost laughed. Some of it's true. He shouldn't be having this conversation. Not with an enemy prisoner, not with anyone who might repeat his words. But somehow, in this small clinic, cut off from the rest of the world, it felt safe to speak truths he usually kept locked inside. Are colored soldiers paid same? Natsumi asked. No, we get less. You risk same life. Yes. This is not right. A gust of wind rattled the windows. Caleb turned from the glass. The other women were watching him now, sensing the serious conversation even if they couldn't understand the words. No, he agreed quietly. It's not right. Something blew against the window with a wet slap. A piece of paper. Caleb unlatched the window enough to retrieve it. A propaganda leaflet, dropped by American planes over Japanese positions weeks earlier. The rain had faded the colors, but the image was still clear. A caricature of a Japanese soldier with exaggerated features, yellow skin and fangs. Words in Japanese underneath. Natsumi looked away when she saw it. What does it say? Caleb asked. It says Japanese soldiers eat children. Her voice was soft with shame. Our leaflets say similar things about Americans. Caleb studied the soggy paper. They tell us you're not human. They tell you we're not human. Makes it easier to kill each other. Is that why they tell your people you are not equal, to make it easier? The question hit with the force of a physical blow. Caleb had never thought of it that way before. But there was truth in her words. A connection between how America treated its black citizens and how nations treated their enemies in war. The need to see some people as less than human. He was saved from answering by another crack of thunder, louder than before. The storm was directly overhead now. The rain came down in sheets, water beginning to pool under the door. We should move the cots away from the windows, Caleb said, changing the subject. This storm's getting worse. They rearranged the clinic, pushing the cots toward the center of the room. Caleb checked the medical supplies, making sure everything was secure in case water got in. As he worked, he felt Natsumi watching him. She had seen something in him, recognized something that few others had bothered to look for. Not just a black man, not just a medic, a person trapped in a system not of his making, doing his best to hold on to his dignity. And he had seen the same in her. It was dangerous territory, for both of them. By dusk, the storm had intensified. Wind howled around the small clinic, finding every crack and crevice to whistle through. Rain lashed the tin roof so hard that conversation became difficult. The temperature had dropped, leaving the women huddled under their thin blankets. Caleb lit another lantern and checked the radio. Static. The storm was interfering with the signal. He adjusted the dial, trying to find the Army frequency, but caught only fragments of transmissions. Static, signal, flood warning, all personnel. He gave up and turned it off to save the battery. Whatever was happening at the main camp, they were on their own out here until the storm passed. Everyone okay? He asked, looking around the room. The women nodded. Even Emiko seemed a little better, sitting up on her cot and accepting a cup of water from Yumi. Radio not working? Natsumi asked. Just static. We'll try again when the storm. The door flew open with a crash. Rain and wind swept into the clinic as a figure appeared in the doorway. The white lieutenant from camp, drenched and furious. 2 MPs stood behind him, rain dripping from their helmets. What the hell is going on here, Hightower? the lieutenant demanded, striding into the room. His eyes swept over the scene. The rearranged cots, Natsumi standing near Caleb, the other women sitting up in alarm. "Sir?" Caleb straightened. "We're dealing with the storm. Some leaks, but nothing serious." The lieutenant's face was flushed. Whether from the rain or anger, Caleb couldn't tell. "That's not what I'm talking about." The officer moved closer, lowering his voice. "I've been hearing things about you getting friendly with the prisoners, about conversations you shouldn't be having." Caleb's mouth went dry. "Sir, I've been following protocol. Basic medical care and—" "Save it." A lieutenant cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I saw the report from the patrol. Observed enemy prisoner making physical contact with Sergeant Hightower. Want to explain that?" "It was accidental, sir, when we were closing windows before the storm." "Accidental." The lieutenant's voice dripped with disbelief. "And what about reports that you've been discussing army policies with them, spreading discontent?" So that was it. The soldier who'd overheard their conversation about segregation had reported back. Natsumi stepped forward. "Please, sir, it was my fault. I asked questions." "Stay back," the lieutenant ordered. He turned to the MPs. "This situation is unacceptable. The prisoners will be moved immediately." Caleb stared in disbelief. "Moved? Where?" "Sir, there's a typhoon-grade storm out there. There's a storage shed about 50 yards down the path. It's secure enough." "A shed? Sir? One of these women has a fever. Another has an infected wound. They need to stay in the clinic where—" "That's an order, Sergeant." The lieutenant's eyes hardened. "Or would you like to be brought up on charges of insubordination, maybe fraternization with the enemy?" The MPs moved into the room. The women huddled together, frightened by the raised voices and tension. "Sir, please," Caleb tried again. "At least wait until the storm passes." "Now, Hightower." Natsumi tried to translate for the others, to explain what was happening, but one of the MPs pushed her roughly toward the door. She stumbled on her injured ankle, nearly falling. "Careful," Caleb moved to help her, but the lieutenant stepped between them. "Don't make this worse than it already is, Sergeant." Caleb stood frozen, fists clenched at his sides. Everything in him wanted to stop this, to protect the women who were his patients, his responsibility. But the threat in the lieutenant's eyes was clear. One wrong move, and he'd face court-martial or worse. The women were herded toward the door. Yumi helped support Natsumi, who couldn't put weight on her ankle after the rough handling. Emiko was trembling again, tears streaming down her face. "At least let me give them medicine, bandages," Caleb said, a final plea. "They'll survive one night," the lieutenant replied coldly. "You'll report their condition in the morning, from a proper distance." Lightning flashed, illuminating the fear on the women's faces as the MPs pushed them out into the storm. Rain immediately soaked their clothes, plastering hair to their faces. Caleb watched helplessly from the doorway as they were marched down the muddy path toward a small wooden structure, barely visible through the rain. The shed was little more than a glorified box with a slanted roof, meant for storing tools and supplies, not housing people. The lieutenant remained in the clinic, watching Caleb. "You're lucky I don't report this up the chain of command, Hightower. A colored medic getting ideas above his station wouldn't look good for any of us." "They're patients, sir," Caleb said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "That's all." "They're the enemy." The lieutenant stepped closer. "And you'd better remember which side you're on." After the lieutenant left, following the MPs down the path, Caleb stood in the open doorway, rain soaking his uniform. Through the curtain of water, he could see lantern light at the shed as the women were locked inside. Then, the MPs and the lieutenant retreated, hurrying back toward the relative comfort of the main camp, leaving the prisoners to weather the storm in a structure never meant for human habitation. Caleb closed the clinic door and leaned against it, heart pounding with anger and shame. The quiet clinic now felt like an accusation. Lightning cracked again, closer this time. In the brief, brilliant light, Caleb saw the medical supplies he hadn't been allowed to bring the women, the extra blankets, the antibiotics Yumi needed. Thunder followed, so loud it rattled the windows, and beneath it, barely audible, came a sound that froze Caleb's blood. A human cry, carried on the wind from the direction of the shed. The cry might have been pain, fear, or simply despair. Caleb couldn't tell, but it pulled him toward the door again. He grabbed a lantern and stepped onto the porch, squinting against the driving rain. 50 yards had never seemed so far. The shed was barely visible, a darker shadow in the gray curtain of rain. No light showed from within. The MPs had taken the lantern when they left, leaving the women in darkness. Caleb stepped off the porch, immediately sinking ankle-deep in mud. The rain was so heavy, it was like walking through a waterfall. Within seconds, he was drenched to the skin. He made it halfway to the shed before stopping. What was he doing? The lieutenant's warning echoed in his mind. If he was caught interfering again, he'd face serious consequences. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, maybe worse. And yet, those women were his responsibility, his patience. Another crack of thunder split the sky. In the darkness that followed, Caleb saw 2 figures approaching from the direction of the camp. MPs on patrol, checking the perimeter despite the storm. They hadn't seen him yet. Caleb retreated, splashing back to the clinic. Inside, he stripped off his soaked jacket and tried to think. The logbook sat open on the desk. He was supposed to record the prisoner's condition twice daily. It gave him an excuse, a thin one but better than nothing. He picked up a pencil and began to write, documenting the lieutenant's decision to move the women. His hand shook slightly as he described the condition of the shed, unsuitable for medical confinement, and his concerns about the patient's welfare. It wouldn't help them now, but it might protect him later if things went wrong. Evidence that he'd done what he could within the bounds of regulations. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. Wind rattled the clinic windows. Rain found new leaks in the roof, creating puddles on the floor. Caleb paced, unable to sit still. He pictured the women huddled in the dark shed, Natsumi with her injured ankle, Yumi with her infection that could turn deadly without proper care, young Emiko already traumatized by war. "Damn it," he muttered, slamming his fist against the wall. The lantern flame flickered. More thunder, a particularly strong gust of wind, and then a sound that made Caleb's heart skip, a crack, like wood splitting. From the direction of the shed, he was at the door before he could think, pulling his wet jacket back on. Protocol and regulations be damned. The path seemed even muddier now, the rain colder. Caleb held the lantern high, trying to see through the downpour. No sign of the MPs. They'd probably sought shelter back at camp. The shed came into view. Even through the rain, Caleb could see something was wrong. The slanted roof sagged on one side where a supporting beam had cracked. Water pooled around the foundation, turning the ground to soup. He reached the door and found it secured with a simple padlock. "Hello," he called, knocking on the rough wood. "Natsumi, can anyone hear me?" A voice came from inside, muffled by the storm. "Sergeant, is that you?" "It's me." Caleb held the lantern closer, examining the lock. "Is everyone all right?" "Roof is breaking, water coming in." Natsumi's voice was strained. Emiko very afraid. Caleb tested the padlock. It was army issue, sturdy despite its small size. He couldn't break it with his bare hands. "I'm going to get help," he called through the door. "Hang on." He splashed back toward the clinic, mind racing. The MPs had the key, but they were long gone. He needed tools, something to break the lock or pry the door open. Inside the clinic, Caleb searched frantically. The supply cabinet yielded nothing useful. Under the desk? Nothing. He looked around in desperation, then spotted his medical kit. Inside was a scalpel, small but made of surgical steel. It might work as a lockpick. He'd never picked a lock before, but he'd seen it done once by a fellow soldier who'd lost his footlocker key. Grabbing the scalpel and a pair of tweezers, Caleb hurried back out into the storm. The wind nearly blew him off his feet. The rain had turned to hail, small pellets that stung his face and hands. At the shed, he set the lantern on the ground and began working on the lock, trying to remember what he'd seen. Insert the scalpel, feel for the pins, use the tweezers too. It was useless. His hands were too wet, too cold. The tools kept slipping. "Step back from the door," he called. The women must have heard because there was movement inside, a shuffling away from the entrance. Caleb picked up the lantern and backed up a few paces. Then he charged, throwing his full weight against the door. Pain shot through his shoulder. The door shuddered, but held. He backed up again, ignoring the throbbing in his shoulder. This time, he aimed lower, where the wood might be weaker. He slammed into the door with all his strength. Wood splintered, the frame cracked. One more try. With a final desperate lunge, Caleb broke through. The door flew open, banging against the interior wall of the shed. Inside, 5 terrified women huddled in the far corner. Water dripped steadily from the sagging roof. The floor was already covered with a half-inch of water. "Come on," Caleb said, gesturing urgently. "We need to get you back to the clinic." Natsumi struggled to her feet, helping Akiko, who seemed weaker than before. Yumi supported Amiko, who was shaking uncontrollably. Haruka had a fresh cut on her forehead from falling debris. They moved as quickly as they could through the storm, Caleb leading the way with the lantern. The wind tore at their clothes. The rain was so heavy they could barely see more than a few feet ahead. Finally, the clinic appeared through the deluge. Caleb ushered the women inside, closing the door against the howling wind. They stood dripping on the floor, shivering and exhausted. Emiko collapsed onto the nearest cot, curling into a ball. "We need to get you warm and dry," Caleb said, moving quickly to the supply cabinet. He pulled out all the blankets he could find. "Here." As he handed them out, footsteps sounded on the porch. The door flew open. The lieutenant stood framed in the doorway, rain streaming from his helmet. Behind him, the 2 MPs from earlier stared in shock at the scene inside. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Hightower?" the lieutenant demanded, his voice deadly quiet. Caleb straightened, blankets still in his arms. "The shed roof was collapsing, sir. They would have been injured or killed. I gave you a direct order." "With respect, sir, I believe your order endangered the lives of prisoners under our protection according to the Geneva Convention." The lieutenant's face darkened. "You're out of line, Sergeant." "I'm a medic, sir. My duty is to preserve life." One of the MPs stepped forward. "Lieutenant, the shed is half collapsed. I just checked it. Another hour and it would have come down completely." The lieutenant ignored him, his eyes fixed on Caleb. "You deliberately disobeyed a superior officer in a war zone. That's grounds for court-martial." "Yes, sir," Caleb said steadily. "If you want to bring me up on charges for saving these women's lives, that's your right." For a long moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the storm outside and the ragged breathing of the frightened women. Then Natsumi stepped forward, her ankle barely supporting her weight. "Please," she said to the lieutenant, "he saved us. Roof was breaking." She pointed to the gash on Haruka's forehead. "We would die." The lieutenant's jaw worked as he considered his options. The MPs shifted uncomfortably behind him. "Sir," one of them said finally, "maybe we should report this to the doctor. Let him decide." The lieutenant's eyes narrowed, but he seemed to realize he was losing control of the situation. "Fine, we'll get the senior medical officer out here at first light." He pointed at Caleb. "But you're confined to this clinic until then. And if I see you within 3 feet of any of these prisoners, you'll be in cuffs before you can blink. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Caleb replied. With a final glare, the lieutenant turned and stormed back into the rain, the MPs following reluctantly behind. When they were gone, Caleb handed out the remaining blankets. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the confrontation and its possible consequences. "You will be punished," Natsumi said quietly. "It wasn't a question." "Probably," Caleb agreed. "Because of us." "Because I made a choice." He moved to check Haruka's head wound. "The right choice." As he cleaned the cut, which fortunately wasn't deep, Caleb felt the weight of what he'd done. He directly disobeyed an order from a superior officer. Even if he was morally right, the army didn't always care about moral right. It cared about the chain of command. But looking at the women, alive, safe, beginning to warm up under the blankets, he knew he would make the same choice again. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside, for the moment at least, they were safe. Tomorrow would bring its own tempest, but that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, Caleb had done what he'd been trained to do: preserve life, no matter the cost. The storm began to ease around midnight. The thunder moved off into the distance, and the rain softened to a steady patter on the tin roof. Inside the clinic, the women had finally fallen into exhausted sleep, huddled under their blankets on the cots. All except Natsumi. She sat on the edge of her cot, watching as Caleb tended to Haruka's head wound one more time. "She will be okay?" Natsumi whispered. Caleb nodded. "It's not deep. Head wounds just bleed a lot." He finished applying a fresh bandage and moved to check on Akiko, whose fever had risen again after their ordeal in the shed. Her breathing was shallow, her skin hot to the touch. "This one worries me," Caleb said quietly. "The fever's getting worse." Natsumi came to stand beside him, limping on her injured ankle. "She is strong, older than us, but strong. She needs real doctors, a hospital." "We all do," Natsumi said simply, "but we have you." The words touched something in Caleb, a reminder of purpose that went beyond army regulations and racial boundaries. He was a medic. These were patients who needed his care. He gave Akiko more aspirin and a sip of water, then straightened up, wincing as pain shot through his shoulder from ramming the shed door. "You are hurt," Natsumi observed. "It's nothing, just bruised." She didn't look convinced but didn't press the issue. Instead, she moved to the window and peered out at the night. "Will they come back, the angry officer?" "Not tonight, but tomorrow." Caleb shook his head. "Tomorrow will be difficult." "What will they do to you?" It was a question Caleb had been asking himself for hours. "Depends on the senior doctor. If he agrees the shed was unsafe, I might just get a reprimand. If not..." He left the sentence unfinished. Natsumi turned from the window. In Japanese army, disobedience means severe punishment, even death sometimes. It's not usually that severe here, but I could lose my rank, be confined. Worst case, dishonorable discharge. Because you saved us. Her voice held a mix of gratitude and guilt. "Because I disobeyed an order," Caleb corrected. "That's how the military works. Even bad orders, especially those." Natsumi considered this. "Your country speaks of freedom, but its soldiers cannot choose right action over wrong order." It was too complex a question for the middle of the night, after everything they'd been through. But it was also the heart of what had been troubling Caleb since he'd made the decision to rescue the women. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "you have to choose between following the rules and doing what's right. And then you face the consequences." Natsumi nodded. "In Japan, we are taught duty above all, obedience without question." She looked at her sleeping companions. "Maybe this is why we lose the war. Too much obedience, not enough heart." The simple observation struck Caleb as profound. How many atrocities in this war, on both sides, had happened because someone was just following orders? "You should rest," he told her. "Tomorrow will come soon enough." Natsumi returned to her cot, but didn't lie down. "What about you?" Caleb shook his head. "Someone needs to keep watch. Make sure Akiko's fever doesn't get worse." After a moment's hesitation, Natsumi settled under her blanket. "Wake me in 2 hours. I will watch then." Caleb wanted to refuse. He was responsible for them, not the other way around. But exhaustion weighed on him like a physical thing. A few hours of sleep would help him face whatever came with the dawn. "All right," he agreed. 2 hours. He settled into the chair by the desk, tilting it back against the wall. The lantern burned low, casting long shadows across the clinic. Outside, the rain had almost stopped. The only sounds were the dripping of water from the eaves and the soft breathing of the sleeping women. Despite his intention to stay awake, Caleb's eyes grew heavy. The events of the day, the confrontation, the rescue, the uncertainty of what lay ahead, had drained him completely. His last thought before sleep claimed him was of home, of his sister's letters and the world that waited for him if he survived this war and whatever punishment might come. A touch on his shoulder woke Caleb from a dream of Georgia's summer storms. He opened his eyes to find Natsumi standing over him, finger to her lips. "Your turn to rest," she whispered. "I will watch." Caleb glanced at his watch. It was just past 2 in the morning. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. Moonlight filtered through breaks in the clouds, casting pale squares on the clinic floor. He wanted to protest, to say he was fine, but the ache in his muscles told a different story, and Natsumi's determined expression suggested argument would be useless. "Wake me if anything changes," he said, moving stiffly to the empty cot in the corner. "Especially Akiko's fever." Natsumi nodded. "I was nurse before soldier. I know what to watch." Caleb stretched out on the narrow cot. It smelled of disinfectant and damp canvas, but at that moment it felt like the most comfortable bed in the world. His eyes closed almost immediately. But sleep proved elusive. His mind kept replaying the events of the night, the lieutenant's threats, the cracking shed roof, the decision he'd made that might end his military career. And beneath it all, the nagging question: what would happen to these women once he was gone? He turned onto his side, facing the wall, trying to quiet his thoughts. The army had rules for a reason. The chain of command kept order in chaos. Without it, war would be even more of a hell than it already was. And yet, there were other rules too. Deeper ones. About human dignity. About doing what's right even when it's hard. His grandmother had taught him that before he could even read. "Stand tall and do right," she'd say, "even when the world tries to bend you down." Was that what he'd done? Or had he just been foolish, risking everything for people who, in the eyes of the army, were still the enemy? The minutes ticked by, each one bringing dawn and judgment closer. Caleb's thoughts circled back to the lieutenant, to the hatred in the man's eyes. It wasn't just about disobeying an order. It was about a black man stepping out of his place. About challenging a system that kept people like Caleb firmly under the boot of people like the lieutenant. A sudden noise outside snapped Caleb fully awake. He sat up, listening intently. It had sounded like a branch breaking. Natsumi had heard it too. She stood by the window, peering into the darkness. "See anything?" Caleb whispered, joining her. She shook her head. Maybe animal. But Caleb wasn't so sure. He moved to the door, opening it just enough to look out onto the porch. The night air was cool and damp after the storm. Moonlight silvered the puddles in the clearing. Nothing moved. Then he saw it. A shadow detaching itself from the edge of the jungle, moving quickly across the open ground toward the clinic. Then another. MPs on patrol. Caleb closed the door quietly. "We have company," he murmured. Natsumi's eyes widened. "The officer?" "No. Regular patrol, I think, but they're coming this way." He moved back to his cot, motioning for Natsumi to return to hers. Better not to give them anything else to report. Boots clumped on the wooden porch. A flashlight beam swept across the windows. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the footsteps moved away, continuing around the perimeter of the clinic. Caleb released the breath he'd been holding. Just a routine check then. Not the lieutenant coming back to make good on his threats. But the encounter left him even more on edge. Dawn was only a few hours away. With it would come the senior doctor and a reckoning for what Caleb had done. He lay back on the cot but kept his eyes open, watching moonlight slowly give way to the first pale hint of morning. Whatever came next, he would face it standing tall, just as his grandmother had taught him. Outside, a bird began to sing, welcoming the new day with a clear, hopeful note that seemed at odds with the dread settling in Caleb's chest. The first gray light of dawn was seeping through the windows when the sound of engines broke the morning quiet. Caleb, who had given up on sleep entirely, rose from his cot and moved to look outside. A jeep bounced down the muddy path toward the clinic, followed by a medical transport truck. In the jeep's passenger seat sat an older white man with captain's bars on his collar, the senior army doctor from the main camp. Caleb straightened his wrinkled uniform as best he could and woke Natsumi. "They're here," he said quietly. "The doctor and probably the lieutenant. Wake the others." As Natsumi roused the women, Caleb quickly checked each one's condition, making notes in the logbook. Akiko's fever had broken sometime in the night. A small mercy. Haruka's head wound looked clean. Yumi's infected arm was no worse. Emiko was still lift-drawn, but at least rested. The jeep stopped outside. Doors slammed. Voices approached. Caleb stood at attention as the clinic door opened. The doctor entered first, a man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and tired eyes. Behind him came the lieutenant, his face set in a hard mask of disapproval. "Sergeant Hightower," the doctor said, his voice neutral. "I'm Captain Miller, senior medical officer. I understand there was an incident last night." "Yes, sir," Caleb replied. "I've documented everything in the logbook." The doctor took the offered book and skimmed through the most recent entries. His expression gave nothing away. "The lieutenant here tells me you directly disobeyed his order regarding the confinement of these prisoners," Miller said, looking up from the logbook. "Is that correct?" "Yes, sir, I did." "And your reason?" Caleb met the doctor's gaze steadily. "The storage shed they were moved to was structurally unsound, sir. The storm made it worse. The roof was beginning to collapse. I believe their lives were in danger." The lieutenant stepped forward. "The structure was perfectly adequate, Captain." Sergeant Hightower overstepped his authority because he had become, he paused significantly, overly concerned with the prisoner's comfort. "I see." The doctor turned to examine the women, who stood in a line beside their cots. His eyes lingered on Haruka's bandaged head. "And how did this injury occur?" Before the lieutenant could speak, Natsumi stepped forward. "From falling wood, sir, when roofs started to break." The doctor raised an eyebrow at the lieutenant, who flushed. "Permission to speak, sir," Caleb said. The doctor nodded. "One of the MPs who accompanied the lieutenant last night can confirm the condition of the shed. He saw it after I brought the prisoners back to the clinic." "Is this true?" Miller asked the lieutenant. "Private Jenkins did mention some storm damage," the officer admitted reluctantly. "But that doesn't excuse insubordination." The doctor closed the logbook. "Lieutenant, I'd like to examine the shed myself, and I need to speak with Sergeant Hightower privately." The lieutenant's jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly. "Of course, sir." After he left, Captain Miller turned his attention to the women, examining each one with quick, professional efficiency. He spent extra time with Akiko, checking her temperature and listening to her lungs. "You've been treating her fever?" he asked Caleb. "Yes, sir, aspirin and Fluence. It broke early this morning." Miller nodded approvingly. "Good work." He straightened up and addressed Natsumi. "Tell the others they'll be moved to the main camp hospital today. Better conditions there." After Natsumi translated, relief showed on the women's faces. Emiko even managed a small smile. "Now," Miller said, turning to Caleb, "let's you and I take a look at that shed." Outside, the sun had fully risen, revealing the storm's aftermath. Branches littered the clearing. The path was a river of mud. And the shed. Caleb and the doctor stood in silence, surveying the damage. One entire side of the structure had caved in overnight. Splintered beams jutted from the collapsed wall. The slanted roof now touched the ground. "They would have been crushed," Miller said quietly. "Yes, sir." "And you knew this was going to happen when you removed them?" "I saw the roof sagging, heard wood cracking. I knew it wasn't safe." Miller turned to face him. "The lieutenant says you've become too friendly with the prisoners, that you've been discussing Army policies with them. Is that true?" Caleb hesitated. Lying wouldn't help, but the full truth could still damn him. "We've talked, sir. They were curious about how our Army works, about segregation." "I see." Miller's expression was unreadable. And did you speak critically of Army policies, Sergeant? No, sir. I just answered their questions truthfully. The doctor studied him for a long moment. You understand that fraternization with the enemy is against regulations. Yes, sir, but providing medical care isn't fraternization. Neither is treating them with basic human dignity. A hint of a smile touched Miller's lips. Well put, Sergeant. He looked back at the collapsed shed. In my medical opinion, your actions last night prevented serious injury or death to prisoners under our protection. That will be reflected in my report. Relief washed over Caleb. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Miller cautioned. The lieutenant is still pushing for disciplinary action. The best I can do is recommend leniency based on medical necessity. They walked back toward the clinic in silence, the doctor seeming lost in thought. Just before they reached the door, he stopped. Off the record, Hightower, Miller said quietly, you did the right thing. Rules exist for a reason, but sometimes compassion has to come first, especially in war. He nodded toward the clinic. Get those women ready for transport. The truck will take them, and you, back to the main camp within the hour. Inside, Caleb helped the women gather what few possessions they had, mostly just the clothes they wore and the blankets they'd been given. Natsumi approached as he checked Akiko one last time before the journey. What will happen now? She asked. You'll go to the camp hospital. Better care there. And you? Will you be punished? Caleb managed a tired smile. I don't know yet, but the doctor seems to understand why I did what I did. Natsumi glanced toward the door, making sure no one was listening. Last night, she said softly, when roof was breaking, you could have left us. It would have been easy. No one would blame you. I would blame me. She nodded, as if he'd confirmed something she already knew. In Japan, we have saying, true character is revealed in crisis. Last night, I saw your true character. Before Caleb could respond, Captain Miller returned, accompanied by 2 medics from the transport truck. We're ready when you are, Sergeant, he said. These men will help with the patients. As the women were assisted onto stretchers, Natsumi insisted she could walk despite her ankle. Caleb gathered his medical kit and duffel. The clinic, which had been the center of so much tension and drama, suddenly seemed small and ordinary in the morning light. Outside, the lieutenant watched from beside his jeep as the women were loaded into the transport truck. His expression was cold, but he made no move to interfere with the doctor's orders. You'll ride with the prisoners, Sergeant, Miller told Caleb. Continue monitoring them during transport. Yes, sir. As Caleb climbed into the back of the truck, he found himself seated across from Natsumi, who had insisted on staying beside Amiko to keep the girl calm. Will we see you again? She asked as the truck's engine rumbled to life. At the hospital? Caleb glanced toward the lieutenant, still watching from his jeep. I don't know. Depends on what happens when we get back to camp. Natsumi's eyes held his for a long moment. Whatever happens, she said as the truck began to move, you showed courage when it mattered. That is bigger than any rank or uniform. The truck bounced down the muddy path, leaving the small clinic and the collapsed shed behind. Ahead lay uncertainty, possible discipline, and the continuing realities of a segregated army in a war-torn world. But as the morning sun broke fully through the clouds, warming his face through the canvas opening, Caleb felt something he hadn't expected. Peace. Whatever came next, he had acted according to his deepest principles. He had chosen humanity over blind obedience, and no punishment could take that away. The transport truck rumbled along the muddy road, swaying like a boat in rough seas. Inside, Caleb braced himself against the wooden bench, keeping a watchful eye on his patients. The women held tight to whatever they could grab as the vehicle bounced over deep ruts and washed out sections of the path. Akiko, the oldest, looked pale, but her fever had broken. Yumi clutched her infected arm protectively against her chest. Haruka's bandage needed changing. A trickle of blood had seeped through from her head wound. Young Emiko stared blankly at the canvas roof, flinching whenever the truck hit a particularly bad bump. Only Natsumi seemed fully alert, her eyes moving between her companions and Caleb. When their gazes met, she gave a small nod of reassurance. "How much farther?" she asked over the engine's roar. "Not long now," Caleb replied, though he couldn't be sure. The storm had changed the landscape, washing away familiar markers. A sudden lurch threw everyone sideways. Haruka cried out as her head struck the side of the truck. "Easy," Caleb called to the driver, who probably couldn't hear him. He made his way across the rocking floor to check Haruka's wound. "I'm okay," she said in halting English. Though blood was seeping faster through the bandage, Caleb steadied himself and carefully removed the soiled dressing. The cut had reopened slightly. He pressed a clean bandage against it, trying to work despite the constant movement. "Hold this here," he told her, guiding her hand to the bandage. From this kit he removed fresh gauze and tape. As he worked, he felt Natsumi watching him. "You are a good medic," she said quietly. "Just doing my job." "No, many do job without heart. You have heart." Before Caleb could respond, the truck slowed, then stopped. Voices called outside. They had reached the main camp. The back flaps opened, flooding the dim interior with morning sunlight. Captain Miller stood there, along with two white medics with a stretcher. "How are they, Sergeant?" the doctor asked, climbing into the truck. "Stable, sir. Haruka's head wound reopened during transport. I was just rebandaging it." Miller nodded and began his own quick assessment of each woman. "Good work, Hightower. We'll take it from here." One by one, the women were helped from the truck. Stretchers were brought for Akiko and Haruka. The others walked, though Natsumi limped badly on her injured ankle. As they passed Caleb, each woman acknowledged him in her own way. Yumi and Akiko bowed their heads. Haruka whispered thank you from her stretcher. Even Emiko managed a fleeting glance and nod. Natsumi was last. She paused at the truck's exit, balancing on her good foot. "Good luck, Sergeant," she said formally, aware of the officers nearby. "You too." She hesitated, then added softly, "You were bigger in courage." The words struck him with unexpected force. Before he could respond, she was gone, hobbling after the others toward the camp hospital. Captain Miller climbed back into the truck. "The lieutenant is waiting for us at headquarters," he said. "How's the shoulder?" Caleb looked up in surprise. "Sir? Your shoulder. The MPs reported you broke down the shed door. Must have taken a few good hits." "It's sore, but functional." Miller smiled slightly. "Good. You're going to need your strength. The lieutenant has filed a formal complaint." Caleb's stomach tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Yes, sir. I've countered with my medical assessment. The shed was clearly unsafe, but ultimately, the commander will decide." They stepped out of the truck into the bustling camp. After the isolation of the field clinic, the noise and activity felt overwhelming. Jeeps rumbling past, soldiers calling to each other, the clatter of mess kits from a nearby dining tent. Miller led the way toward headquarters, a large tent flying the American flag. Outside stood the lieutenant, arms crossed, expression thunderous. "Remember," Miller said quietly as they approached, "whatever happens, you saved lives last night. Don't forget that." The lieutenant barely acknowledged Caleb's salute. "Captain, Sergeant, the commander is waiting." Inside the headquarters tent, a gray-haired colonel sat behind a field desk, reading through paperwork. He looked up as they entered, his weathered face unreadable. "Gentlemen, at ease." He set down the papers. Caleb recognized his own logbook among them. "I've reviewed the reports from both of you. Quite a situation we have here." "Sir," the lieutenant began, "Sergeant Hightower directly disobeyed." The colonel held up a hand. "I've read your statement, Lieutenant. I've also read Captain Miller's medical assessment and seen the photographs of the collapsed structure." He turned to Caleb. "Sergeant, do you have anything to add?" Caleb stood straight, eyes forward. "Only that I acted according to my medical training, sir. The prisoners' lives were in danger." "And you felt this danger superseded the lieutenant's order?" "In that specific circumstance, yes, sir." The colonel nodded thoughtfully. "Lieutenant, your record indicates you ordered the prisoners moved during a severe storm. May I ask why you felt that was necessary?" The lieutenant shifted uncomfortably. Intelligence suggested the possibility of escape attempts, sir. The clinic was deemed too comfortable, too accessible. By whom? By me, sir. The colonel's eyebrows rose slightly. I see. He shuffled the papers on his desk. And the report that Sergeant Hightower had been fraternizing with the prisoners? What evidence do you have of that? He was observed in close conversation with the English-speaking prisoner, discussing army policies, segregation. Caleb tensed, but the colonel's expression didn't change. Captain Miller, your medical opinion? Miller stepped forward. Sir, I found no evidence of improper conduct. The sergeant maintained appropriate medical protocols while treating prisoners with basic human dignity. As for the shed, it was clearly unsafe. Had the prisoners remained there, we would likely be dealing with serious injuries or fatalities this morning. The colonel considered this, fingers drumming lightly on the desk. The tent fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the camp and the occasional snap of the canvas in the breeze. Sergeant Hightower, he said at last, the Army functions on a chain of command. Orders must be followed. However, he glanced at the lieutenant. Orders must also be lawful and reasonable. Endangering prisoners under our protection is neither. Hope flickered in Caleb's chest, but he kept his face impassive. You're being reassigned, Sergeant. Back to general medic duties effective immediately. The colonel picked up a pen and made a notation in a ledger. Consider this a verbal reprimand for failing to follow proper channels of appeal. Next time, try to find a senior officer before taking matters into your own hands. Relief washed over Caleb. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The lieutenant's face had darkened. Sir, with respect. That will be all, Lieutenant. The colonel's tone made it clear the matter was closed. You're also being reassigned pending a review of prisoner handling protocols. Report to Major Wilson this afternoon. The dismissal was clear. Caleb and Miller saluted and turned to leave. The lieutenant remained rigid, clearly struggling to contain his anger. Outside, in the bright morning sun, Miller clapped Caleb on the shoulder. That went better than expected. Yes, sir. Thank you for your support. Just told the truth, Sergeant. Miller glanced back at the headquarters tent. The lieutenant won't forget this, though. Watch your back. I always do, sir. Miller nodded. Get some rest. Report to the main medical tent tomorrow morning at 0700. The prisoners, sir, will they be all right? They'll receive proper care. Beyond that? Miller shrugged. War's ending soon, according to the radio. They'll probably be repatriated once Japan surrenders. The thought should have been comforting, but as Caleb watched Miller walk away, he felt strangely hollow. The women would be cared for, which was good, but he would likely never see them again. Never know what happened to them after the war. Never learn if Natsumi found her way back to a country devastated by bombing. If Emiko ever recovered from her trauma. If Yumi's infection healed completely. They had been his responsibility, his patience, and now they weren't. With a deep breath, Caleb picked up his duffel and headed toward the black soldiers' barracks. His shoulder throbbed with each step, a physical reminder of choices made and consequences faced. Behind him, life in the camp continued, oblivious to the small drama that had played out, to the lives that had been saved, to the acts of courage that would never make the history books, but mattered all the same. The barracks were nearly empty when Caleb arrived. Most of the men were on duty or in the mess hall for the midday meal. He set his duffel on his old bunk, the thin mattress sagging under the weight. Home sweet home. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the events of the past 24 hours finally catching up to him. His body ached. His mind felt fuzzy with exhaustion. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, the full weight of what had happened, what could have happened, pressed down on him. He'd risked everything, his rank, his record, his future after the war. All for 5 women who, until 2 days ago, had been faceless enemies, and he'd do it again. The door creaked open. Thompson, the driver, walked in with a cup of coffee. He stopped short when he saw Caleb. Well, look what the storm washed in. Thompson handed him the cup. Figured you could use this more than me. Caleb accepted the coffee gratefully, the warmth seeping into his cold hands. Thanks. Heard what happened. Thompson sat on the adjacent bunk. Whole camp's talking about it. The sergeant who defied a lieutenant to save Jap prisoners. They were going to die in that shed. I believe you. Thompson looked at him with newfound respect. Takes guts to stand up to brass like that. Caleb sipped the coffee. It was bitter and burnt, but right now it tasted like the finest thing in the world. What's the damage? Thompson asked. Verbal reprimand. Reassignment back to general duties. That's it? Man, you got lucky. Captain Miller backed me up. The colonel seems fair. Thompson shook his head. Still, a black man standing up to a white officer? In this man's army? I'd have put money on you facing court-martial. He wasn't wrong. If Miller hadn't supported him, if the shed hadn't actually collapsed, proving the danger was real, things might have ended very differently. The women okay? Thompson asked. They're in the camp hospital now. Better care there. Thompson studied him. You got attached to them, didn't you? They were my patients. Uh-huh. Thompson didn't sound convinced. Just be careful. War's almost over, but some attitudes ain't changing anytime soon. The door opened again. Davis and Wilson entered, stopping when they saw Caleb. There he is, Wilson said, the hero of the hour. Caleb winced. Don't call me that. Too late, Davis said, dropping onto his bunk. Stories all over camp. Some of the white boys are even saying it was a good thing you did. Not the lieutenant, I bet. Hell no. Word is he's furious. Got his eye on you now, so watch yourself. It was the second warning in less than an hour. Caleb nodded, too tired to say more. He finished the coffee and set the cup aside. You look beat, Thompson observed. When's the last time you slept properly? Can't remember. Better get some rest then. We'll wake you for chow. Caleb didn't argue. He stretched out on the bunk, not bothering to remove his boots. The thin pillow felt like heaven beneath his head. As he drifted towards sleep, fragments of the past day swirled in his mind. The storm, the cracking shed roof, Natsumi's words. You were bigger in courage. The last thing he saw before sleep claimed him was Natsumi's face, dignified even in captivity. Her eyes reflecting a respect he rarely received from anyone in uniform. When he woke, the barracks were dark except for a single lantern. Someone had removed his boots and placed a blanket over him. Outside, crickets chirped in the warm evening air. Caleb sat up, disoriented. What time is it? Almost 8, Davis answered from a nearby bunk where he was writing a letter. You slept through dinner. Saved you some bread and beans. A plate sat on the small table between the bunks. Caleb's stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten properly in over 24 hours. As he ate the cold meal, Davis filled him in on camp news. Rumor is Japan's on the verge of surrender. That new bomb we dropped, some big-shot scientist said one more might do it. Caleb thought of the 5 women in the hospital tent. What would surrender mean for them? For their families back home? For the devastated country they would eventually return to? Also, Davis continued, heard your POWs are being moved tomorrow. Transport's taking them to Manila, then onto a proper internment facility. Caleb set down his fork. They're leaving. First thing in the morning, from what I heard. So soon? He'd known they would be moved eventually, but tomorrow? He wouldn't even have a chance to check on them one last time, to make sure Haruka's wound was healing or Yumi's infection was under control, to see if Emiko had started to come out of her shell-shocked state, to say goodbye to Natsumi. You could try to see them tonight, Davis suggested, reading his expression. Medical tent's not far. Might be your last chance. Caleb considered it. He'd been ordered to resume general duties tomorrow, not to stay away from the hospital tonight. Still, after everything that had happened, visiting the women now might be pushing his luck. But the thought of them leaving without a word didn't sit right either. I think I will, he said, standing up, just to check their medical status. Davis smiled knowingly. Sure, their medical status. That's all it is, Caleb insisted. Uh-huh. Davis returned to his letter. Just don't get caught by the lieutenant. Outside, the camp was settling down for the night. Lights glowed in the officers' quarters. Guards patrolled the perimeter. In the distance, someone played a harmonica, the mournful tune carrying on the still air. The hospital tent stood on the eastern edge of camp, its Red Cross flag hanging limp in the windless evening. 2 MPs guarded the entrance, but they were chatting and smoking, not paying much attention. Caleb approached confidently, his medic armband clearly visible. "Evening. Just checking on the Japanese POWs brought in this morning." One of the MPs straightened slightly. "You their doctor?" "Their medic, yes, from the field clinic." The MP shrugged. "They're in the back section." "Doctor?" "Parker's with them now." Caleb's heart sank. If another doctor was already there, he had no real reason to visit. But he'd come this far. "I'll just check in with Dr. Parker then. Follow up on their treatment." The MPs waved him through with little interest. Inside, the large tent was divided into sections by hanging canvas partitions. The air smelled of antiseptic and blood. Moans came from some of the cots where wounded American soldiers lay. Caleb walked toward the back, where enemy wounded and prisoners were kept separate from Allied personnel. A white-coated doctor emerged from behind a partition, making notes on a clipboard. "Dr. Parker?" Caleb asked. The man looked up, older than Miller, with thick glasses and a permanent frown. "Yes?" "Sergeant Hightower, sir. I treated the Japanese women at the field clinic. Wanted to check on their status before they're transferred." Parker studied him over the rims of his glasses. "Ah, the heroic sergeant I've heard about." His tone made it unclear whether he approved or not. "They're stable. The older one's fever is completely gone. The infected arm is responding to penicillin. Head wound healing nicely. And the young one, Emiko? Physically fine. Mentally, he made a so-so gesture. Shell shock takes time. She's speaking a little more, though. May I see them?" Parker hesitated. "They're preparing for sleep. I'm not sure. Please, sir, just for a moment, to check if they need anything before transfer." Something in Caleb's expression must have convinced him. "5 minutes," Parker said. "No more." "Thank you, sir." Parker held back the canvas partition. "The English speaker has been asking about you, by the way. Wanted to know if you were in trouble." Beyond the partition, 5 beds were arranged in a semicircle. The women sat up as Caleb entered, surprise and then recognition crossing their faces. Natsumi stood from her bed, steadier on her ankle than before. "Sergeant Hightower, you came. Just checking on everyone before tomorrow." The women exchanged glances. They hadn't known they were being moved. "Tomorrow?" Natsumi asked. "You're being transferred to a larger facility. In Manila first, I think." Natsumi translated for the others. Soft murmurs of concern rose from the group. "Will you come too?" Haruka asked in her limited English. Caleb shook his head. "No, I'm staying here. Back on regular duty." More translated exchanges. Then Yumi spoke, looking directly at Caleb while Natsumi translated. "She says thank you for saving her life. The medicine is working. Her arm is better." Akiko spoke next, her voice strong despite her recent fever. "She says you are a good man, not like the propaganda told them." Imiko, still quiet but more present than before, simply bowed her head in thanks. Caleb felt a lump forming in his throat. "Just doing my job," he said. "No," Natsumi said firmly. "Not just job." Harker cleared his throat from the partition entrance. "Time's up, Sergeant." Caleb nodded. "Take care of yourselves," he told the women. "The war's almost over. You'll be going home soon." As he turned to leave, Natsumi stepped forward. "You were not punished?" she asked quickly. "Just reassigned. I'm fine." Relief crossed her face. "Good. I was worried." "Your worry got me through it," Caleb said softly, surprising himself with the admission. For a brief moment, they stood facing each other. No longer just medic and prisoner, but 2 people who had shared something profound amid the chaos of war. "Sergeant," Parker called more insistently. "Goodbye, Natsumi," Caleb said. "Safe journey." She bowed deeply, more formal than any previous gesture. "Goodbye, Sergeant Hightower. I will remember your courage." As Caleb walked away, leaving the hospital tent and stepping into the warm night, her words echoed in his mind. Not just the ones spoken tonight, but those from the shed during the storm. You were bigger in courage. In all his life, no compliment had ever meant more. The next morning arrived with clear skies and rising heat, typical August weather returning after the storm. Caleb reported to the main medical tent at 0700, as ordered, ready to resume his regular duties. Captain Miller nodded in greeting. "Hightower, good to have you back." "Thank you, sir." "The transport left an hour ago," Miller said, not needing to specify which transport. The women were in good condition. "Dr. Parker did fine work continuing your treatment protocols." Caleb nodded, trying not to show the strange emptiness he felt. "Good to hear, sir. I've assigned you to wound cleaning and dressing changes today. Station 3. Miller handed him a clipboard. 10 patients waiting already. The familiar routine was almost comforting. Checking wounds, changing bandages, administering medications. The work kept Caleb's hands busy and his mind partially distracted from thoughts of 5 women heading toward Manila, and eventually back to a Japan forever changed by war. At midday, he took a short break, sitting outside the medical tent with a canteen of lukewarm water. The camp buzzed with more energy than usual, soldiers gathering around radios, officers moving purposefully between headquarters and communications tents. Thompson appeared, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Something's happening," he said without preamble. "Big news coming over the wires." "About the war?" "What else? Brass is saying Japan might surrender any day now. That second bomb we dropped hit somewhere called Nagasaki." Caleb thought of Natsumi saying her father had died in the Tokyo bombing. How many more Japanese civilians had died in these new attacks? Parents, children, the elderly. People who had nothing to do with military decisions. "If it ends the war," Thompson continued, "I'm all for it. Means we might get home by Christmas." Home. The word stirred conflicting emotions. Georgia meant family, his sister, his uncle, his cousins. But it also meant returning to a place where his uniform wouldn't protect him from prejudice and segregation, where saving lives wouldn't matter as much as the color of his skin. "Mail came while you were playing hero," Thompson added, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "From your sister." Caleb took the letter gratefully. His sister's handwriting was a piece of home right here in the Philippines. He tucked it away to read later, when he could savor every word in private. "Thanks," he said. "I should get back to work." Inside the medical tent, more wounded had arrived, not from battle, but from accidents. A jeep had overturned during perimeter patrol. 3 men with various injuries needed attention. Caleb worked steadily through the afternoon, his experienced hands cleaning, stitching, and bandaging almost automatically. All the while, his mind drifted to the letter in his pocket, to the women on their way to Manila, to the rumored end of the war that had consumed the last 3 years of his life. It was nearly dusk when Miller finally dismissed him. "Good work today, Hightower. See you tomorrow, same time." Outside, the camp was settling into evening routines, mess tents filled with hungry soldiers. Cigarette embers glowed in the growing darkness. Phonograph music drifted from the officers' club. Caleb headed for a quiet spot behind the barracks, a small clearing with a fallen log, where he sometimes sat to read letters from home. The Philippine jungle loomed beyond, mysterious and alive with night sounds. Under the light of a small flashlight, he carefully opened his sister's letter. "Dear Caleb, I pray this letter finds you safe and well. Things here in Marigold continue much as always, though the war news gives everyone hope it might end soon. Your cousin James came home last month, wounded at Okinawa but recovering well. I wish I could write only of good things, but truth must be told. Last week, a colored veteran named Thomas Jenkins was badly beaten for using the white water fountain at the train station. He just returned from fighting in Europe, still had his uniform on. The sheriff said he'd investigate, but you know what that means here. The church took up a collection for his medical bills. Your uncle contributed generously, as always, though some folks criticized him for it, said he was encouraging troublemakers. Uncle just said any man who fought for this country deserves better, and let them talk. I tell you this not to worry you, but because you should know what awaits when you return home. The war might be ending over there, but the fight continues here. Sometimes I wonder if things will ever truly change. Write when you can. Know that I pray for you daily. Your loving sister, Ruth." Caleb folded the letter carefully, his throat tight. Thomas Jenkins, another black man who'd risked his life for his country, only to come home to hatred and violence. It could have been him. It still could be once he returned to Georgia. The contrast between his sister's news and his own recent experience felt jarring. Here, he had defied a white officer to save enemy lives and been vindicated. The colonel had supported him. Miller had supported him. Even some of the white soldiers respected what he'd done. But back home, a black man couldn't even drink from a public water fountain without risking a beating. The unfairness of it all burned in his chest. The hypocrisy. Fight for freedom abroad, but don't expect it at home. Natsumi's question echoed in his memory. Is it true that colored soldiers eat different food than white soldiers? He'd told her it was just how things were. But why should it be? Why should any of it be that way? The night breeze carried the sound of a chaplain's evening service from somewhere across camp. Familiar hymns about grace and redemption. Caleb listened, finding both comfort and challenge in the ancient words. Tomorrow would bring more wounded to treat, more orders to follow, more reminders of his place in the army and the world. But tonight, under a sky bright with stars, he allowed himself to imagine something different. A world where courage and character mattered more than color. Where saving lives earned respect regardless of who did the saving or who was saved. A world bigger than the one he'd known. With a deep breath, he tucked his sister's letter away and headed back to the barracks, carrying both the weight of her news and the memory of Natsumi's words like twin compasses guiding him forward. The next morning broke hot and clear. Rumors of Japan's imminent surrender electrified the camp. Soldiers gathered around radios during breaks. Officers held hushed conferences. An atmosphere of anticipation hung in the air. The war might actually be ending. For Caleb, the day passed in a blur of routine medical procedures. Check wounds, change bandages, administer medications, document everything. The familiar rhythm helped quiet the thoughts still swirling in his mind. About the women, about his sister's letter, about what might come next. At noon, Captain Miller approached him. "Hightower, take a break. Someone's here to see you." Caleb looked up from the wound he was cleaning. "Me, sir?" Miller nodded toward the tent entrance. "Senior doctor from Manila General. Says he wants to talk to the medic who treated the Japanese POWs." Puzzled, Caleb finished bandaging his patient's arm and walked to the entrance. A tall white man in a major's uniform waited outside, squinting in the bright sunlight. "Sergeant Hightower?" The major extended his hand, an unusual gesture from an officer to an enlisted man, especially a black one. "Major Reed, Manila General Hospital. Got a few minutes?" "Yes, sir." Caleb shook his hand, still confused. They walked toward a quieter area near the supply tents. Reed pulled out a cigarette case, offered one to Caleb, then lit both when Caleb accepted. "I just came from processing the Japanese prisoners you treated," Reed said, exhaling smoke. "Interesting group of women." Caleb waited, unsure where this was heading. "The translator? Tanaka, I believe?" She had quite a story to tell about a storm, a collapsing shed, and a medic who defied orders to save their lives. Caleb tensed. "Sir, I can explain." Reed held up a hand. "No need. I've read Captain Miller's report. Sounds like you did exactly what a medical professional should do. Put patient welfare first." "Thank you, sir. Not why I'm here, though." Reed took another drag on his cigarette. "I'm here because Tanaka made a specific request before they continued to the internment facility. This was unexpected." "What kind of request?" "She asked that you be informed they arrived safely in Manila, that all 5 are doing well medically, and that they are grateful." Reed studied Caleb closely. She was quite insistent about it. Something warm spread through Caleb's chest. She had remembered him, had thought it important enough to make a special request to a high-ranking officer. "Thank you for telling me, sir." Reed nodded. "She also mentioned something about you being bigger in courage. Said you'd understand what that meant." Caleb couldn't help the small smile that touched his lips. "Yes, sir, I understand." "Care to explain?" Seems to have made quite an impression on her. For a moment, Caleb considered deflecting the question, but something in the Major's expression suggested genuine interest, not suspicion. When they first arrived at camp, Caleb explained, 2 of the women were surprised by my size. They commented on it, and some of the white MPs turned it into a joke at my expense. He paused, remembering the humiliation of that moment. Later, during the storm, when I got them out of the shed, Tanaka said what made me truly big was my courage to do what was right, not my physical size. Reed's eyebrows rose. Profound observation from an enemy prisoner. She's a person first, sir. Enemy second. Indeed. Reed stubbed out his cigarette. Well, I've delivered the message. They're being processed for eventual repatriation once the war officially ends. Will they be treated well, sir? Reed considered this. As well as prisoners can be. Better than most, probably, being women and medical personnel. He paused. They left quite an impression on you too, didn't they? Caleb didn't answer directly. They were my patients, sir. Of course. Reed seemed to understand what remained unsaid. Well, Sergeant, I should get back to Manila. Just thought you deserved to know your patients are doing well. I appreciate that, sir, very much. As Reed walked away, Caleb finished his cigarette slowly, savoring the unexpected news like a gift. They were safe. They remembered him. Somehow that knowledge made everything else, the lieutenant's hatred, his sister's troubling letter, the uncertainty of what came next, more bearable. He returned to the medical tent with lighter steps, ready to finish the day's work. By evening, the news everyone had been anticipating finally came through official channels. Japan had indicated willingness to surrender under certain conditions. While not a formal capitulation yet, it was close enough that celebrations erupted throughout the camp. Soldiers shouted and embraced. Someone produced a hidden bottle of whiskey. Even officers joined in the revelry, relief visible on faces that had maintained professional masks for years. In the black soldiers' barracks, the mood was more restrained but no less emotional. Men shook hands, clapped shoulders, spoke of home with voices thick with longing. Can't believe it's finally ending, Thompson said, sitting beside Caleb on his bunk. 3 years in this uniform. 3 years away from Mississippi. You miss it? Caleb asked. Thompson laughed without humor. Miss some things. My mama's cooking, my little brother, the river where I used to fish. He shook his head. Don't miss the rest. The signs saying colored and white. The looking down at the ground when white folks pass by. Being called boy at 25 years old. Caleb nodded. His sister's letter weighed heavy in his pocket. My sister says a veteran got beaten back home, just for drinking from the wrong water fountain. Don't surprise me none. Thompson looked down at his hands. We fight their war, bleed the same blood, but nothing changes. Maybe it can. Thompson looked at him curiously. What makes you say that? Caleb wasn't sure himself. But something had shifted inside him these past few days. Some small seed of defiance, of hope, of determination. If we stood up out here, he said slowly, maybe we can stand up back there too. That's dangerous talk. So was breaking down that shed door. Thompson studied him. You really have changed, haven't you? Something about those women got to you. Caleb didn't deny it. They saw me, not just a colored soldier, not just a medic, me. And you saw them too. It wasn't a question. Yes. Well, Thompson said after a moment, maybe that's where it starts. Seeing each other. Really seeing. He stood up. Come on. They're serving extra rations to celebrate. Might as well enjoy it while we can. The mess hall buzzed with excitement. Extra coffee had been brewed. Canned peaches, a rare treat, had been opened. Men talked loudly about going home, seeing families, resuming interrupted lives. Caleb ate quietly, listening to the conversations around him, the plans, the hopes. His own future remained a question mark. Return to Georgia. Look for opportunities elsewhere? The world seemed simultaneously more full of possibility and more complicated than ever before. After dinner, many soldiers headed to an impromptu celebration at the edge of camp. Caleb declined to join them, preferring the quiet of the barracks. He wanted to write to his sister, to share the news about the war's impending end, to tell her, what? That he had changed? That a Japanese nurse had shown him something about courage that 3 years in the army had not? That he was coming home different from the man who had left? Words failed him. Instead, he lay on his bunk as darkness fell, listening to distant singing and occasional cheers from the celebration. Tomorrow would be another day of treating wounds and following orders. The war wasn't officially over yet. But tonight, alone in the near-empty barracks, Caleb allowed himself to believe that something new was beginning, not just for the world, but for him personally. A life defined not by others' expectations or limitations, but by the courage to stand tall and do right, no matter the consequences. As he drifted toward sleep, Natsumi's voice echoed in his memory. You were bigger in courage. Maybe, he thought as consciousness faded, that was the biggest thing about any person. Not their size or strength or status, but the capacity to act with courage when it mattered most. 4 days later, Caleb sat in a small office at camp headquarters, facing an investigation officer, a captain with a thin mustache and tired eyes. A typewriter sat ready on the desk between them. An MP stood by the door, at ease but watchful. The formal inquiry into the shed incident had finally been scheduled. Despite Japan's conditional surrender, Army procedures ground on. Forms must be filled. Reports must be filed. Incidents must be investigated. State your full name and rank for the record, the captain instructed. Sergeant Caleb James Hightower, United States Army Medical Corps. The captain typed each word methodically. This inquiry concerns the events of August 12, 1945 at Field Clinic Station 17 regarding your actions during Tropical Storm Beatrice and the relocation of Japanese prisoners of war. He looked up. Do you understand the purpose of this inquiry? Yes, sir. Good. Please describe in your own words what occurred that night. Caleb took a deep breath and recounted everything. The lieutenant's order to move the women to the shed, his concerns about the structure's safety, the worsening storm, the sounds of breaking wood, his decision to remove the prisoners, and the shed's eventual collapse. The captain typed continuously, pausing only to ask clarifying questions. His expression revealed nothing about his thoughts. And you broke open the door yourself? He asked. Yes, sir, using body weight against the frame. Risking injury to yourself? The risk seemed acceptable given the circumstances. The captain nodded, typing again. Lieutenant Carson's report suggests you had developed inappropriate concern for these prisoners, that you engaged in conversations beyond medical necessity. How do you respond? Caleb chose his words carefully. I communicated as needed for proper medical care. The translator, Tanaka, spoke English and helped with the others. Our conversations focused on their medical history and needs. Nothing beyond that? Caleb hesitated. The captain noticed. Sergeant, this is an official inquiry. Full disclosure is required. Tanaka asked questions about American military practices, specifically about segregation of troops. I answered factually. The captain's eyebrows rose slightly. I see. He typed this information, then asked, and why did you feel it appropriate to discuss such matters with an enemy prisoner? I didn't see it as political, sir, just factual. She was curious about why black and white soldiers ate separately, received different pay. And what did you tell her? The truth, sir. That's how things are. The captain studied him for a moment. Were you critical of Army policies during these conversations? No, sir. I just explained the situation as it exists. More typing. The MP by the door shifted his weight, seeming bored by the proceedings. Captain Miller's medical assessment indicates the shed was structurally unsound and dangerous during the storm. The captain continued. His report strongly supports your decision to remove the prisoners despite contrary orders. Do you have anything to add to his assessment? Only that the structure completely collapsed within hours of us leaving it. Had the prisoners remained inside, serious injury or death would have been certain. The captain nodded and typed this statement. And the MP on patrol that night, Private Jenkins, confirmed seeing the damaged structure before complete collapse. Yes, sir. The captain typed a few more lines, then sat back. I've reviewed all relevant reports, including statements from Captain Miller, Private Jenkins, and even the Japanese translator via Major Reed from Manila. He removed the paper from the typewriter and added it to a folder. This inquiry finds that while you did disobey a direct order from Lieutenant Carson, your actions were justified under medical necessity and the obligation to prevent harm to prisoners under Geneva Convention protocols. Relief washed over Caleb, though he kept his expression neutral. The reprimand issued by Colonel Williams stands as the appropriate response, the captain continued. No further disciplinary action is recommended. Thank you, sir. The captain closed the folder. Off the record, Sergeant. He glanced at the MP and lowered his voice. Lieutenant Carson has been reassigned to supply coordination in Manila. He won't be returning to this camp. Caleb nodded, understanding the unspoken message. The lieutenant's poor judgment had not gone unnoticed by superior officers. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we conclude? The captain asked. No, sir. Thank you for conducting a fair investigation. Just following procedure. The captain stood, signaling the end of the meeting. You're dismissed, Sergeant. Return to your regular duties. Caleb saluted and left the office, stepping into the bright afternoon sun. A weight he hadn't fully acknowledged lifted from his shoulders. The matter was officially closed. His record would show a minor reprimand, nothing more. As he walked back toward the medical tent, several soldiers nodded in greeting, including some white GIs who would have ignored him a week earlier. Word had spread about what happened at the field clinic, about his stand against the lieutenant, about the shed that collapsed, proving him right. Small gestures, perhaps meaningless in the larger scheme of things, but Caleb noticed them all the same. Captain Miller looked up from a patient chart when Caleb entered the medical tent. How did it go? Investigation concluded. No further action. Miller nodded approvingly. Good. You've earned some respect around here, Hightower. Not easy to do in this man's army. Thank you, sir. Now, help me with this supply inventory. War may be ending, but paperwork is eternal. Caleb spent the remainder of the day counting bandages, organizing medications, and restocking treatment stations. The routine work allowed his mind to wander to what might come next. Japan's formal surrender seemed imminent. Plans for occupation and peacekeeping were already being discussed. Some units would stay in the Pacific for months or years to come. Others would return home quickly. Which category would include him remained to be seen. And beyond military service, what then? Return to Marigold, where men like Thomas Jenkins were beaten for using the wrong water fountain? Look for opportunities in the North, where discrimination might be less overt, but no less real. The questions had no easy answers, but for perhaps the first time since joining the Army, Caleb felt he had choices, real choices, about the direction of his life. Something had awakened in him during those tense hours in the storm. A recognition of his own capacity for moral courage. A refusal to accept that's just how things are as the final word. As evening approached, Miller dismissed him. Go get some dinner, Sergeant. You've earned it. The mess hall would be crowded now, the segregated tables filled with men talking about the war's end, about going home, about the future. Usually, Caleb would have hurried to join them, to secure his place among his fellow black soldiers. Today, he took a detour. The path to the hospital tent was quiet in the evening light. The MPs who had guarded it when the Japanese women were there had been reassigned to other duties. Only a single nurse sat at the entrance, reading a novel while keeping watch over the recovering American wounded inside. Evening, Caleb greeted her. She looked up, surprised. Can I help you? Sergeant? Just passing by. How are the men doing? As well as can be expected. Everyone's eager to go home now that the fighting's nearly over. Caleb nodded. Aren't we all? He continued walking, circling the hospital tent once before heading back toward the main camp. He wasn't sure why he'd come this way. The women were long gone, in Manila now, soon to be headed back to Japan once peace was officially declared. Yet something had drawn him here. Perhaps just the need to remember what had happened, to acknowledge the change it had sparked in him. As he walked back to join his fellow soldiers for dinner, Caleb felt strangely at peace. Whatever came next, whether return to civilian life in Georgia or continued service elsewhere, he would carry with him the lessons of these past days. About seeing people as people first, regardless of uniform or origin. About standing up for what was right, even at personal cost. About being bigger in the ways that truly mattered. The sun was setting over the Philippine jungle, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Soon darkness would fall. But for now, the world was bathed in light. The camp mess hall buzzed with conversation. Radio reports of Japan's imminent formal surrender dominated every discussion. Men talked of home, of discharge papers, of returning to wives and sweethearts and the jobs they'd left behind. Caleb sat with his usual group, Thompson, Davis, Wilson, and a few other black soldiers from support units. Their plates held the same thin stew and hard bread served every day. But no one complained. Food was food, and soon enough they'd be eating something else, somewhere else. "They're saying we might start shipping out next month," Thompson said between bites. "Combat units first, then support." "I'll believe it when I see those orders," Davis replied skeptically. "Army's got a way of changing plans." "No, it's happening this time," Wilson insisted. "Overheard the colonel talking to the chaplain. They're already preparing rotation schedules." Caleb ate quietly, listening to the speculation. Part of him longed for home, for familiar voices and places, for his sister's cooking, for air that didn't feel like breathing through a wet towel. But another part dreaded returning to a country where his uniform wouldn't shield him from hatred and discrimination. Across the mess hall, white soldiers engaged in similar conversations at their tables. The invisible but rigid line of segregation remained, even as the war that had brought them all to this distant island neared its end. Yet something had changed. Caleb noticed it in the glances directed his way, not all hostile or dismissive anymore. Some nodded in acknowledgement. A few even smiled. Word of what happened at the field clinic had spread through camp. The story had grown with each retelling, no doubt. But the essential truth remained. A black medic had stood up to a white officer to save enemy lives and had been vindicated. "Hear about Carson?" Thompson asked, lowering his voice. "Word is he's been shuffled to some paperwork job in Manila. They're calling it a reassignment, but everyone knows it's a demotion. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy," Davis muttered. "Careful," Wilson warned. "Walls have ears." As if to prove his point, a group of white officers entered the mess hall. Conversation dimmed momentarily, then resumed at a more cautious volume. "Anyway," Thompson continued, turning back to Caleb, "you made quite an impression, Hightower. Not just on the brass, but on the men, too. Some of those supply guys were talking about you yesterday. Said they didn't think a colored medic would have the guts to stand up like that." Caleb set down his spoon. "It wasn't about guts. It was about doing what's right." "Same thing sometimes," Thompson replied. A soldier from another table approached, a white corporal Caleb recognized from the motor pool. Conversation at their table stopped. "Hightower?" the corporal asked. "That's me. Letter came for you. Got mixed in with our mail." He held out an envelope. "Thought you'd want it right away." Caleb accepted the letter, surprised by the gesture. "Thanks." The corporal nodded and returned to his table. Thompson raised his eyebrows. "Times really are changing," he said. "A month ago, he'd have tossed that in the trash." Caleb examined the envelope. It wasn't from his sister or any familiar correspondent. The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar. The return address was simply Manila General Hospital, POW Processing Division. His heart quickened. There was only one reason he'd receive mail from that address. "You gonna open it?" Davis asked. Caleb tucked the letter into his pocket. Later. They finished their meal amid continued speculation about discharge dates and travel arrangements. Some men had plans to stay in the service. Better prospects there than in civilian life for many Black Americans. Others couldn't wait to get back to families and communities, despite the challenges that awaited. After dinner, Caleb didn't join the others, heading to the makeshift recreation area. Instead, he walked to his quiet spot behind the barracks, sat on the fallen log, and carefully opened the letter. The paper inside was thin Army-issue stationery, covered with neat handwriting. Sergeant Hightower, I hope this letter finds you well. Major Reed has kindly agreed to deliver this message when he returns to your camp on official business. We have been processed for internment until formal peace is declared, after which we will be repatriated to Japan. All 5 of us remain in good health. Yumi's infection is completely healed. Haruka's head wound has closed without complications. Akiko's fever has not returned. Even young Emiko has begun to speak more, though she remains quiet much of the time. I write not only to inform you of our condition, but to express once more our deepest gratitude for what you did that night in the storm. Among my people, there is a concept called giri, a duty or obligation that must be honored. By saving our lives, you created a debt that cannot be easily repaid. But more than this duty, I wish to convey something personal. In a time when our countries see each other only as enemies, you showed us that humanity can transcend borders and uniforms. You risked your position and safety for people you had every reason to despise. This lesson will stay with me always. The Americans here tell us Japan will soon surrender completely. The war that brought us together as enemies will end. But I hope that someday, when peace has healed some of these wounds, our countries and peoples might truly see each other, not as propaganda portrays us, but as we are. I do not know if we will meet again in this life, but know that whatever path lies before you, you have the respect and gratitude of 5 women who once feared you, then came to see your true character during a storm. You were and are bigger than they thought, in all the ways that matter most. With deepest respect, Natsumi Tanaka. The end.